Say hello to my guest, Simon Turner at LSI 2023. Simon, thanks for coming by the studio.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So tell me, what's going on at LSI? What brings you out this year?
Oh, a whole host of factors. Really what brings us here, and particularly we're coming over from Paris and the European ecosystem, is to see what's going on in the US, quite frankly, in terms of meeting new innovative startups, of course, on the one hand, but also looking at the co-investors, of course, that are important for our portfolio companies and helping them bridge the Atlantic and get over to the US, which is one of the main markets we see.
I love the idea of like bridging ecosystems. So how do you bring that about? What are you looking for when you're coming here to talk to companies?
Yeah, I mean, it's really looking at this kind of notion of we're life science investors. We love getting into these early stage companies, seed and Series A, bringing our expertise. Again, we've been around for 50 years focusing in on this life science experience. What we're looking for is companies, and particularly entrepreneurs, that have this real kind of innovation component, this need to disrupt what they're currently seeing. So we're looking for innovative biotech, medtech, digital medicine companies where we feel not only there's a good fit with the entrepreneur, but also this ability to co-create a story, something that can really change the paradigm of medicine as we see it today.
It seems like there's the rise of the digital aspects of healthcare. One of the interviews we had this morning, we began to unpack the medical device, the thing itself, then having software that is enabled by that,
Yep.
and then the data that's generated by that software, and then the data coming back to redesign, new software, new data. Are you seeing that kind of a virtuous cycle?
Oh yes, very much so. I mean, traditionally we've seen a lot of investment into the kind of the med tech side of things. So again, these kind of classical hardware systems. We have, of course, this theory and ethos that you always need biotechnology, you'll always need medical devices. Now that what we're seeing is there's also a lot of data being generated, either from existing legacy systems or in fact just totally new data sets. With the advent of new computational techniques also coming into this, suddenly you can leverage existing data, novel approaches and things like that to actually gain added insights. So you're going beyond just the raw data that we're able to see and able to therefore start really impacting patient outcomes, but also the healthcare system and tackling, I guess, the inefficiencies that we're kind of seeing that have been built up. COVID was a really kind of nice way of showing us that, wow, there is an enormous amount of pressure on the healthcare system. It's not always capable of dealing with things. We got through that with flying colors, I want to say, because again, we have such great people in the healthcare systems, but it also highlighted how we can use data and computational techniques now to make new sense and therefore really improve the healthcare outcomes.
Inside of the European Union, that what you call that European ecosystem, are you finding the rise of data to come from some unexpected places?
So the rise of data itself, I'd say, is more about finally healthcare systems being able to digitize themselves. So suddenly we're able to unlock these kind of mass repositories of data. What we're seeing, though, however, is also the way that the computational techniques are coming about. And whereas classically you'd almost have, let's say, the more or less biomedical sciences, doctors, physicians, healthcare practitioners developing innovation, now suddenly we have the rise of, for example, data scientists, as well as mathematicians and physicists, bringing in these new kind of algorithmic approaches that can really make sense of the mass amounts of data that we're seeing in healthcare. So it's really seeing this kind of confluence of not only data and data sets, but also the techniques that are being applied. And they're coming from, let's say, less classical places that we wouldn't have normally seen life science innovation happening from.
So we might have the healthcare system as being helped by the people that have never really seen themselves as healthcare entrepreneurs or healthcare innovators.
Right, and we're starting to see it today. I mean, there's a lot of kind of tech entrepreneurs, successful tech entrepreneurs, which are now beginning to look into healthcare and thinking, right, my first startup, maybe it was more about a consumer product, maybe something that, was great in terms of providing, music or listening capabilities, say Spotify, for example, or Skype. Now suddenly they're seeing that actually you can take these similar approaches and begin applying them to the healthcare sector. And we're seeing things as kind of vast and as varied as, for example, the automotive industry, or even in aircraft manufacturers, for example. They've been using digital twins to basically design and simulate their engines. When will they start to fail? When is a point where you need to actually intervene to be able to then avoid a catastrophic failure? That same understanding, those same mathematical approaches and modeling can now be applied to organisms, to cells, but then also to much more complex biological systems. So we're seeing this type of innovation, entrepreneurship, and really, dare I say, even companies beginning to move into our field, in fact, into healthcare. And it's bringing this mass wave of new knowledge, in fact, unlocking these incredible potentials that we see.
Yeah, I look at like 3D printing and 3D modeling. There was a lot of that area, being able to, well, what if we could actually mimic the tumor? I'm picking up on your digital twin. So if we could mimic that, and then we can mimic the interaction of the drug to the tumor to oncology, all of a sudden, these incredibly new pathways begin to open up.
Exactly. And I mean, it's even maybe taking it a step more basic, in fact. It's if you're able to simulate a tumor, so from a single patient, we can start then looking at existing drugs and therapies, which would potentially be the best intervention to apply. So what we're suddenly doing is, before even needing to go to the patient and say, okay, let's try combination A, then B, then C, then D, and waiting for these long periods of time to see, are we getting a response or not? We can simulate that in silico, get to a point where we say, actually, this drug 1 combination is not working. However, drug 2 seems to be having a great response. And if we combine that with drug 3, for example, we have this incredible outcome, and almost a complete response type scenario. So what you're doing is you're tackling these inefficiencies, these delayed feedbacks that we otherwise have in the pathways. Very similar to what I guess SpaceX was doing when they were trying to train their first vertical landing rockets. Again, without in silico simulations, it would have taken them thousands, if not millions of tries. God knows the kind of catastrophe of breaking so many rockets. You can do it in silico, and suddenly you can run simulation after simulation after simulation until you get to something very close to a really good outcome. So doing that, we're basically able to start getting to this personalized care approach that we've been talking about so much.
Yeah, it seems like we've got to have something to change the economic models that is going into precision health and personalized care. We simply can't have, it's $75,000 a dose per patient. Oh, and you need a series of 15.
Yeah.
No one can do that.
Nope.
So do you think this is going to be, beginning to apply these can be a gateway for us?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, this is kind of where medicine will go into the future. We need to get to a point where, when we're prescribing a therapy or when we're putting together a treatment plan, to your point, $75,000 a pop, but only a 30% response rate. We won't know which 30% is responding until it's maybe 6 months later. That's an enormous healthcare cost, but also just detrimental to the patients. I mean, 70% will then be sitting on ineffective treatments. Whereas if we can get to a point of understanding the fundamental principles of what makes them unique as a patient, simulating what's the best treatment approach, we'd be able to actually provide an alternative therapy. It may not be the first line, actually it may be second or even third, but it would be adapted and bespoke to them and their needs versus, again, normal standard patient 1, for example.
That's very interesting. Just to pick up on one of the things you said, is maybe the first thing we need to do is actually just mimic that patient. Not the general human being, the biome or something, but actually this patient, your makeup, and how does your makeup interact with this?
Exactly right. We're going away from this one pill fits all type approach. We're seeing in oncology, we're starting to get a bit of precision medicine coming into that. You've seen the companion diagnostics that have been developed, the fact that you now start to have some treatment stratification. But I mean, the next stages will eventually get to a point where we're able to integrate multiple different data sets together. We'll get to a point where we can maybe achieve multi-omic type approaches. Suddenly we can get to that N equals 1 patient. And then it is really to your point, it's an in silico simulation of you or I or whichever patient it is, but it's them being their own control. And hence we know what's the best for them particularly.
So in Europe, are you seeing this melting pot? Are you able to find ecosystems where you're able to bring in these other kinds of, when we look at Stanford Biodesign model, right? So physician, engineer, MBA, business person. Well, now data science, software science, biomechanics, deepening an understanding of maybe a certain disease state. Are you finding that Europe has something to offer for this development?
I mean, I might be slightly biased being a European at heart, but absolutely. We're seeing these ecosystems pop up all over Europe. And in fact, it goes too deep as to say we've got expertise in genomics and genetics, but then you're starting to see, again, to your point about novel imaging techniques or even just understanding of it. So radiology, histology, all of these components are actually coming up of age very quickly. The beauty is as well, within Europe, you have so many different clusters, again, depending on the countries, regions, and the historics of that you're starting to see different specialities kind of combining. They're now being brought together so much more. So this kind of future of a multi-omic based approach, I guess, which would get us eventually to personalized care, you're starting to see the first building blocks of that fundamentally kind of arriving. And that's really what we're kind of counting on to see into the future. Maybe to name just one place, I mean, France, which is our home base, of course, of Sophie Nova, we've seen an enormous rise of this digital health and particularly kind of the digital medicine aspects of it in Paris, but of course, and also the surrounding ecosystems around it. But if you think about it, within 3 or 4 hours, you have so many major cities and clusters. If it's the Golden Triangle, if it's what the Helsinki ecosystem is doing and kind of these new types of technology approaches, the Germans as well in terms of what's going on around the Irish ecosystems. It's creating such an easy melting pot, in fact, of bringing all these people together.
I often coach, the people that I advise or talking with these startups. It's especially this idea of like regulation is bad. I'm going to disrupt. It exists for a very important reason, and these are major regulated industries because they're so important to the economy and to people. Turn that into competitive advantage, embrace it, lean into it, and then you will begin to have a new idea that is completely acceptable and building on and propelling us into compliance and into just sort of embracing what we have to do
Absolutely.
inside this industry.
You're 100% correct. I mean, I couldn't agree more with this, even to the point where our portfolio companies, occasionally we say, actually, let's push this a little bit further. Let's set the new gold standard for what should be considered, best practice within this. If it's the way that we treat patient data, if it's the way that we check the safety of a new AI algorithm, for example, all these components, because if and when you set that gold standard, you work with, if it's the regulatory authorities or the payers or whoever the healthcare providers are, you've suddenly created a new benchmark by which anyone else must measure up to. If you're continuously innovating on that, you'll be heralded as the gold standard, so hence the best in the business, but also making sure that you're creating certain barriers to entry, in fact. So you're creating your own defensible moat around you by trying to be as good as you can rather than trying to skirt the issue in many cases. And again, it's the importance of treating these things as tactical or strategic advantages potentially. And again, it's not necessary to say that you must always go down the hardest route, but at least think about it and see what are the implications if you do or don't.
Excellence as the competitive advantage in healthcare. Anything else you want to share with us today?
No, just that we're super bullish on the entire space. I mean, again, we've seen so much innovation happening over the last years, particularly in biotech and medtech. Now with our new kind of evolution into this digital medicine side of things, we're really bullish on how much this will impact the entire healthcare system and services. And all I can say is for all the entrepreneurs out there, we'd love to kind of have them come and discuss with us because we see it as fantastic to gain with the experience and knowledge of biotech, with medtech, and of course this new digital leverage that we have.
Thanks so much for coming by, Simon.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.
Simon Turner, take one, marker.